They called him a miracle. They called him a survivor. But the truth? JD Vance was a storm, born from chaos, rising through pain, and rewriting what everyone thought was possible. Imagine a boy standing in the middle of a small Ohio town, watching the only world he's ever known crumble around him. Factories closing, families breaking, hope fading. That boy, one no one expected to escape, would one day walk the halls of Yale, write a book that shook America's soul, and end up standing next to the most powerful figures in the country. But how did it happen? How did a kid from a broken home rise to become a U.S. Senator and a potential future vice president? This is the story of JD Vance. Before we dive deep into his unbelievable journey, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear is more than a biography. It's a human story of struggle, faith, anger, love, and redemption. And trust me, by the end, you won't see the American dream the same way again. Let's begin. He was born James David Vance in Middletown, Ohio, in 1984, a town once booming with steel and pride, now echoing with layoffs and despair. His mother, Bev, was fierce and loving when she wasn't caught in the storm of addiction. His father, Don, drifted out of the picture early, so JD found himself tossed between homes, emotions, and identities, wondering what stability even looked like. But there was one unshakable presence: Mama. Bonnie Blanton, everyone called her Mama, was not your gentle grandma type. She smoked like a chimney, cursed like a soldier, and had the heart of a lion. She once threatened to kill a man just for mistreating JD's mother. And yet, she was the anchor, the force that held JD's fragile world together. She had a saying: "You can't change where you come from, but you can change where you're going." And JD listened, even when he didn't believe it yet. School was hard, not because he wasn't smart, but because his world was chaos. He watched his mother move from one relationship to another, sometimes dragging JD into screaming matches and even police sirens. One night, she was arrested after chasing him through the streets in a fit of rage. He was barely a teenager, running from his own mother. That was the night he finally moved in with Mama full-time. And that decision? It changed everything. Hidden gem fact number 1. JD once admitted that if Mama hadn't taken him in, he might have ended up in jail, or worse. Under her roof, he learned discipline and love, the tough kind. She made him do his homework, respect himself, and never, ever play the victim. She told him, "Nobody's coming to save you, JD. You've got to save yourself." Words that would echo in his mind for the rest of his life. But still, Middletown was tough. Drugs, violence, unemployment. Dreams felt like fairy tales. Until JD made a choice few in his town dared to make. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps. At 18, he left behind the noise, the pain, the poverty, and found structure. The Marines became his second family. Iraq was his new reality. Hot sand, fear, discipline, brotherhood. It was there he learned how to push beyond pain, how to focus when everything felt impossible. He says the Marines taught him how to live. Hidden gem fact number 2. In Iraq, JD once guarded a warehouse full of ammunition for days with no sleep, surviving only on energy drinks and a stubborn will to prove himself. When he came home, something had shifted. He wasn't the scared kid anymore. He was a man who'd seen death and wanted life. He went to Ohio State University, finishing in under 2 years with the highest honors. Then came the leap that shocked everyone: Yale Law School. Think about it. A boy from a collapsing Rust Belt town, now walking the marble halls of one of the world's most elite institutions. JD often said he felt like an alien there. His classmates talked about Europe trips and ski vacations, while he thought about unpaid bills and his mother's rehab visits. He struggled to fit in, to believe he belonged. But a professor named Amy Chua, yes, the famous Tiger Mom, saw something special in him. She pushed him to write about his past. And slowly, the story of his life began to take shape, the story that would soon become Hillbilly Elegy.
Hidden Gem Fact Number 3. JD originally titled the book A Memoir of a Family and a Culture in Crisis. The name Hillbilly Elegy came later, and it changed everything. When the book hit shelves in 2016, America stopped and listened. JD's raw honesty about poverty, addiction, and broken families struck a nerve, especially during an election year that divided the nation. He wasn't preaching politics. He was telling a story, his story, and people saw their own pain in his words. Overnight, he went from unknown law graduate to a national voice on the American working class. TV networks called him. Politicians quoted him. Some praised him as the voice of forgotten America. Others accused him of oversimplifying pain. But no one could ignore him. He became a symbol of both hope and controversy. And behind the fame, something personal was happening too. JD had found love. His Yale classmate, Usha Chilukuri, a brilliant lawyer from a South Asian family, became his wife, the calm to his storm. They built a life together, one rooted in faith, education, and the lessons he carried from Mama's home.
Hidden Gem Fact Number 4. JD and Usha's wedding blended Christian and Hindu traditions, a quiet symbol of how far his world had expanded. But fame is never simple. JD was now being asked about politics, about the economy, Trump, and the forgotten Midwest. At first, he was skeptical of Trump. He even called himself a never-Trumper. But over time, something shifted. He saw the same anger, the same desperation he'd grown up with in Trump's base, and he began to understand it. By 2022, JD Vance had done the unthinkable. He ran for the U.S. Senate in Ohio and won. The boy who once ran from his mother's rage now walked the Senate floor. The kid who doubted he'd ever escape poverty now shaped national policy. Hidden Gem Fact Number 5. JD's Senate campaign was backed by tech billionaire Peter Thiel, who donated $15 million, one of the largest personal contributions in political history. His victory wasn't just political, it was poetic. It was the story of a man who had lived America's hardest truths and found his way through them. But even as he rose to power, JD never stopped wrestling with who he was. Was he still the hillbilly from Middletown, or had he become part of the elite he once feared?
He says, "I don't want to forget where I came from, because if I do, then I lose everything." Today, JD Vance stands at the intersection of power and purpose, a voice for the working class, a man molded by pain and faith, and a politician many believe could one day reach even higher. And here's the twist. His story isn't over, not even close, because whispers are growing louder. Whispers that JD Vance could be the next vice president of the United States. From chaos to Congress, from a broken home to the heart of American power. It's not just a comeback story. It's a reinvention of the American dream. But what happens when the dreamer becomes the one shaping the dream for millions? How will the boy who once ran from fire now lead others through it? The next part of JD Vance's story might just be the most shocking yet. Power changes people. Or maybe It just reveals who they really are.
When JD Vance took his oath as U.S. Senator for Ohio in 2023, many thought they already knew who he was. The best-selling author, the hillbilly made good, the voice of forgotten America. But few expected the transformation that was coming. The cameras flashed, the nation watched, and behind that calm smile, the Marine, the writer, the son of chaos, was preparing for a whole new kind of war. Washington, D.C. is a different battlefield. It doesn't smell of gunpowder, but of strategy, ambition, and power. And JD Vance, the boy who once felt like an outsider in every room, was stepping into the most exclusive room of them all, the U.S. Senate. At first, the whispers began. Can a man who grew up in poverty really fit in here? Can a best-selling author actually survive politics? But JD wasn't here to fit in. He was here to fight. He arrived with a mission to give a voice to those who felt unheard, unseen, and forgotten. The factory workers, the veterans, the single parents, the people who reminded him of Mama's neighborhood, the ones who'd been left behind by both parties.
His speeches were fiery, his tone defiant. He spoke about broken towns, hollow promises, and the dream that America had forgotten. And whether you agreed or not, you listened, because he spoke with the conviction of someone who had lived the pain he described. Hidden gem fact number 1. JD Vance once wrote that his biggest fear in Washington was turning into the kind of man I used to despise, a confession that showed just how aware he was of power's pull. But politics isn't just passion, it's chess. And JD was learning fast. He built alliances, learned the rules, and spoke directly to the base that had once inspired him, the working-class voters of the Midwest. His shift toward Donald Trump surprised many. Remember, he was once a vocal critic. He had called Trump reprehensible. But over time, he saw something deeper, a connection between Trump's message and the frustration he'd grown up with. To JD, it wasn't about personality. It was about pain, and who was willing to speak to it. He began aligning himself with the populist movement, a new wave of conservatives who said, "We don't care about the elites, we care about real people." And soon, his name was being whispered alongside the biggest in politics. Hidden gem fact number 2. JD's first private meeting with Trump in 2021 lasted nearly 2 hours and ended with Trump reportedly telling aides, "That guy's got something." Still, not everyone was convinced. Some old friends from Yale accused him of selling out. Critics said he'd changed his tune just to win votes. But JD countered, "I didn't change, the world did." He believed America was in cultural and moral decline, and he wanted to help rebuild it from the inside out. One of his first fights as senator was over manufacturing, bringing jobs back to Ohio, protecting American steel, and fighting foreign competition. But he also dove into cultural debates about family, faith, and values. He warned that America's biggest crisis wasn't just economic, it was spiritual. That's where he got both applause and anger, because JD Vance didn't just talk policy, he talked about the soul of America. He said, "If you don't build strong families, no economy can save you." And for millions of Americans who'd lost faith in politics, those words hit deep. But for others, they sounded judgmental, even harsh. Suddenly, JD became one of the most polarizing figures in Washington. Hero to some, lightning rod to others. Hidden gem fact number 3. JD was one of the youngest senators in the 118th Congress, but also one of the loudest voices in debates about cultural identity and the future of conservatism. Behind the political storms, though,
was still the same man who missed Mama every day. He'd often talk about her, how she'd raised him with grit and faith. Sometimes he'd even quote her on the Senate floor, saying, "Mama used to say, 'You don't get what you don't work for.'" It made him sound less like a politician and more like a neighbor who never forgot home. But Washington tests every man, especially the ones who claim to be different. Soon, JD found himself at the center of national attention again. Not for his book this time, but for his beliefs. He was outspoken about border control, about tech censorship, about protecting traditional families. The media either loved to quote him or loved to attack him. And through it all, JD didn't flinch. He'd been through worse. He'd faced poverty, violence, addiction, even war. Politics? That was just another kind of battlefield.
Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2024, Donald Trump chose JD Vance as his running mate, the vice presidential candidate of the Republican Party. The announcement sent shockwaves across the nation. A once critic of Trump, now standing beside him on stage, smiling under the bright lights. For some, it was the perfect pairing, the billionaire and the hillbilly. For others, it was unthinkable. But either way, America was watching. Hidden gem fact number 4. JD's selection as VP candidate made him one of the youngest people in modern U.S. history to be nominated for that role, just 40 years old. Suddenly, the boy from Middletown was flying across the country, from small towns to massive rallies, shaking hands, giving speeches, and defending his vision of a stronger, prouder America. He often spoke about his childhood again, not for sympathy, but as proof. Proof that broken beginnings don't mean broken endings. He told crowds, "I'm living proof that no matter where you start, you can make it if you fight hard enough." And people cheered because they saw themselves in him. But fame once again brought fire. Critics dug up his old tweets. Commentators dissected his every word. They called him too extreme, too ambitious, too unpredictable. But JD stayed calm, almost detached, like a Marine trained to keep focus under fire. And through it all, his wife Usha and their kids stayed quietly by his side, away from the spotlight, but always the heart of his world. He said in one interview, "The best title I'll ever have isn't senator, it's dad." A reminder that no matter how far he's come, he still sees life through the eyes of that boy Mama raised. Hidden gem fact number 5. JD once said he keeps one of Mama's old handwritten notes in his Senate office drawer, a note that simply says, "Don't be afraid of the fight." And maybe that's what defines JD Vance best. He's not afraid of the fight. Not of poverty, not of politics, not of power. He's the man who rose from nothing and never forgot the sound of his grandmother's voice telling him he could do more. Today, JD stands at the center of America's most heated political storm. Half the country praises him as a symbol of hope and renewal. The other half questions his motives and his methods. But either way, he's impossible to ignore. And beyond politics, there's something else. A legacy forming. A belief that maybe, just maybe, the American dream still works, if you're willing to fight for it. As the crowds chant his name, as headlines debate his every move, you can almost picture him looking up at the stars, the same sky that hung over Middletown, Ohio, and whispering, "Mama, we made it." But deep down, JD knows making it isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Because now, the responsibility isn't just to tell America's story,
It's to help write its next chapter. The boy who grew up surrounded by chaos is now trying to bring order to a divided nation. The Marine who once guarded ammunition now guards the hopes of millions. And the man who once doubted his place in the world now stands at the heart of it. Whether history remembers JD Vance as a hero, a rebel, or something in between, one thing is for sure: he will be remembered. Because JD Vance didn't just climb out of the hills, he brought the hills with him, straight to Washington. And if there's one lesson his story leaves us with, it's this: no matter how dark your past, your future is never written in stone.
So, if you're listening right now, maybe you're fighting your own battles. Maybe your life feels like it's stuck in Middletown too. Remember JD's story, because the same fire that lifted him lives in you too. And as always, if this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because we're not just telling biographies here, we're uncovering the journeys that prove anyone can rise. This was the life of JD Vance, the hillbilly who defied fate, rewrote his story, and just might reshape America's future. Every story has a beginning, but the greatest ones, the ones that outlive the storyteller, are about what happens after the dream comes true. JD Vance had climbed the mountain. Senator, author, national figure. But success doesn't silence the echoes of where you came from. It only makes them louder. In Washington, surrounded by marble walls and flashing cameras, JD sometimes thought about the smell of Mama's kitchen, the cigarette smoke, the laughter, the chaos that somehow held them together.
And then he'd look at his own children and realize he was now writing their fate. That's the thing about rising out of poverty. The climb never really ends. It just changes shape. JD often said that success made him more grateful, but also more restless. Because the higher he went, the more he saw how broken things still were. Families still falling apart. Towns still struggling to breathe. Dreams still dying in the same places he once called home. He knew he couldn't fix it all, but he believed he had to try. Hidden gem fact number 1. JD Vance donates part of his book earnings to addiction recovery programs in Ohio, a quiet tribute to the people and battles that shaped him. In interviews, when asked what drives him now, he never talks about ambition. He talks about responsibility. He says, "When you've been given a miracle, you owe the world something back." And maybe that's why his politics, love them or hate them, always sound personal, because they are. He isn't talking about statistics. He's talking about memories. Faith has become another cornerstone of his life, not the loud, political kind, but the kind that kept him alive when everything else fell apart. He talks often about forgiveness, especially toward his mother, Bev. For years, their relationship was a storm, but as she found recovery, JD found peace. He once said, "I stopped waiting for the past to apologize. I just started living for the future." That forgiveness changed him. It softened the edges that fame had sharpened. It reminded him that redemption, the theme of his life, isn't just something you preach, it's something you practice. And that's where JD's story becomes more than politics. It becomes a mirror for anyone who's ever tried to outrun their past. He wants people to see that no matter how deep the hole, there's always a rope. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's faith, Sometimes it's your own anger turned into drive. Hidden gem fact number 3. Before every major speech, JD listens to the same song, Simple Man, by Lynyrd Skynyrd, because, as he says, it reminds me who I was before all this.
In Washington, he continues to champion manufacturing, veterans' rights, and family policy. He's pushed for bills that encourage companies to invest in small-town America, and he speaks often about rebuilding trust between people and the government that forgot them. But even as his profile grows, JD still makes quiet trips back to Ohio. He walks the same streets he once ran through as a scared kid. He visits schools, meets families, and listens, really listens, to their stories. Because that's where he still feels grounded, in the noise of ordinary lives. When people ask him what success feels like, he laughs. He says, success is when you can look at where you came from and not flinch. It's a reminder that no amount of power can erase the smell of the past, and maybe that's a good thing. Hidden gem fact number 4. JD still drives an old, beat-up pickup truck when he's in Ohio, the same one he bought before Yale. He says it keeps me honest. But beyond the politics, beyond the headlines, something else is taking shape: a legacy. JD Vance has become a symbol, both celebrated and criticized, of America's changing identity. Some call him the new face of working-class conservatism. Others see him as a complex figure, torn between two worlds that will never fully accept each other.
And in a way, they're all right. JD isn't one thing. He's the product of contradiction. A man caught between faith and reason, struggle and success, tradition and transformation. That's what makes him fascinating. That's what makes his story human. In private moments, JD has said his biggest dream isn't to be president or legend. It's to be the kind of father Mama would be proud of. To raise kids who never have to wonder if they matter. Because deep down, that's the heart of every American story. Not fame, not money, but family. The people who keep you fighting when the world wants you to quit. Hidden gem fact number 5. JD once turned down a major TV contract for a political talk show, saying, "I don't want to talk about America from a studio. I want to change it from the ground." And maybe that's the final truth about JD Vance. He's not just living the American dream, he's redefining it, showing that dreams aren't about escaping where you're from, but transforming it. He believes the next great chapter of America won't be written in Washington or Silicon Valley, but in the forgotten towns, the broken families, and the stubborn hearts that still believe in something better. As he once said, we don't need perfect heroes. We just need people who refuse to give up. The crowd cheered that night when he said it, but if you looked closely, you could see something in his eyes. Not pride, but gratitude. Because JD Vance knows he's not supposed to be here. Statistically, he shouldn't have made it, but he did. And now, he carries that miracle like a torch. Maybe one day, history books will describe him as a senator, or a vice president, or even a president. Or maybe